Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In part 3 of his work Ressentiment, which is devoted to an analysis of Christian morality, Max Scheler is going to make a case for what we typically call altruism, that is, other-centered behavior, often understood as being other-centered at the expense of oneself and held up as an ethical ideal, is not really what Christian love is about. And this might be a bit of a monkey wrench for people who like to contrast Christian love as agape or caritas, understanding that as self-giving love that exhausts oneself for the other, contrasting that to eros or philia or other things. You know, Scheler is actually going to point out some important features of what he takes to be genuine Christian love. And I want to begin with an interesting passage that we're quoting verbatim. Nothing can be further removed from this genuine concept of Christian love than all kinds of, and notice he's got these in quotes, socialism, social feeling, and altruism. Now, socialism does have a more restricted meaning for Scheler, who, is a social thinker and careful with his language than I think it does for a lot of people today who use it in a very loosey-goosey sort of way. He's talking about socialist movements at the time. And social feeling, refers to this idea of we should all be benevolent to each other. And then he invokes the term altruism. Altruism as being other-centered, other-focused, as I mentioned before, at one's own expense. So he's going to be criticizing that. What's the point behind this? Well, he thinks that trying to connect Christian love or interpret Christian love in terms of altruism or social feeling gets things mixed up that we really need to distinguish. So he talks about love in Jesus' sense, and he says it does in fact help energetically. Think about the character of Jesus as revealed in the Gospels. Think about the things that he says, his direct teachings, his parables. We are seeing that helping other people, doing for the other, plays an important role. But what is the real motivator there? Love. Love is going to help, but that's because it is, as Scheler's going to say, immersed in positive value. It does not consist in the desire to help or even in benevolence. Now, benevolence is a term that we hear a lot. It literally means having a goodwill, willing good for other people. Nothing wrong with that. Right? Scheler's not saying, don't be benevolent, don't ever help anybody. But that isn't what love consists in. So if you think that agape means just that, Scheler would say you actually don't understand how Jesus is using it. And he says that such love is immersed in positive value, right? And helping and benevolence are only its
consequences. So they're not the motive, they're not the origin, they're not the function of loving. Loving is something more, but it does result, it does take shape in helping and benevolence. And then he talks a little bit about the fake love of a ressentiment person who doesn't actually offer any real help. Why? Because his perverted sense of values, evils like sickness and poverty have become goods, so they're not really going to help people out. Whereas a healthy person is going to see a sick person, a poor person, and they will help them out of love, right? So he goes on, and he says that this doesn't mean that the value of love in the genuine Christian sense lies in the usefulness of the helping deed, right? So usefulness, utility, beneficence, we could use lots of terms here, helping people out. That's a good thing. Love is also a good thing. They are not directly correlated. And so he's going to bring up the example of the widow's mites. Now, this is a biblical story coming from the Gospels where an old widow is going to, put her two little bits of wealth, which is a lot for her, into the collection. And Jesus is going to say, that lady's making a real contribution because she doesn't have a lot, and she's doing it out of love. People who have tons and tons of money and tithe or contribute or do, build stadiums or stuff like that, there's no guarantee they're actually doing that out of love. Benefit can be measured, right? This person contributes more money, this person contributes more welfare in certain ways, but there's no direct connection to how much love you have or exhibit. He says, the usefulness may be great with little love or none at all. And it also may be small. Well, love is great. The widow's mites are more to God than the gifts of the rich, not only because they're mites, but because the giver is a poor widow, but because her action reveals more love. And now we get to a very interesting observation. He says, the increase in value originally always lies on the side of him who loves, not on the side of him who is helped. Does that mean that loving doesn't actually benefit the one who is helped in terms of love? No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that there is no increase in value. But originally, it's on the side of the doer, the agent, the person who is motivated by love, not on the side of the person who is being raised up by that love through the benevolence. So he goes on and he says, love is no spiritual institution of charity. And this is another really important matter, particularly when we're thinking of altruism. Love, he says, is not in contrast to one's own bliss, one's own happiness. So this would be saying love is not altruistic in the negative sense of saying the test for whether you're being altruistic, you don't get anything out of it at all, right? Maybe it even goes against your interests. That's how you can tell that you really are beneficent. That's how you can tell you really love. Scheler would say, no, that's wrong. If you are doing things saying that they're motivated by love and you actually don't like to do it, you might not actually be loving in that case. So he goes on and he says, in the very act of self-renunciation, the person eternally wins himself. He is blissful in loving and giving, for, and here's another quote, it is more blessed to give than to receive. He goes on and says, love is not valuable and does not bestow distinction on the lover because it is just one of the countless forces that produce or promote further human or social welfare. So where is the value of love? The value of love is in love. That is the point of love. It is its own valuable thing, act, comportment. Not, it certainly does lead to other good things that are valuable, but that's not the point of loving, according to Scheler. So he's going to go on and say the value of love is love itself, its penetration of the whole person, how it gets into you. And what else? The higher, firmer, and richer life and existence of which its movement is the sign and the gem. He says the important thing is not the amount of welfare, but there should be a maximum of love among human beings. So the act of helping, again, not saying don't help anybody, right? The act of helping is as he's going to say, the direct and adequate expression of love, not its meaning or purpose. Where does its meaning reside then? In itself, in its illumination of the soul, and the nobility of the loving soul in the act of love. This is where he's going to say that. This is why nothing can be further removed from this genuine concept of love than all kinds of socialism, social feeling, altruism, and other subaltern, that is subordinate, modern things. And so he's going to bring up another parable. It makes sense. He's talking about Christian morality. He's talking about the example of Jesus. Why not bring up something that has always been puzzling to many people, the case of the, we could call it the rich man who's young, the rich youth, right? And it's not a parable as such. Jesus doesn't say, here's a parable, but it functions as a parable for us. When we read that, we're like, what's going on there? So what is this story? There's a rich young man, and he's a good guy. He gives to other people, and he follows the laws, and he's, wonderful to other people. And he says, Master, he's saying this to Jesus, what do I need to do to be perfect, to be more fulfilled as a good person, as a follower of the path that you're laying out? And Jesus says, oh, that's simple, man. Sell everything you got, give it to the poor. And then the rich man goes away, and he's sad because he had many good things. And he doesn't want to give those up, right? So what are we supposed to draw from this? Scheler is going to tell us, here's how we can interpret it. When the rich youth is told to divest himself of, sell everything, divest himself of his riches and give them to the poor, what's the point there? Is it just to benefit the poor? That's the way that some, people have interpreted the story. Scheler says it's not really in order to help the poor and effect a better distribution of property in the interest of general welfare. I mean, if the story was about that, maybe that would actually be in the story. No, what is the point here? He says it's also not because poverty as such is supposed to be better than wealth. That's not the answer to the question. Why should he do this? What's the answer? Well, the act of giving away and the spiritual freedom and abundance of love which manifest themselves in this act ennoble the youth and make him even richer than he is. They would if he were to do that. So love itself is not something that we ought to be doing just because it leads to the general welfare or individual welfare. That's a nice side effect of it. That's a nice expression of it, helping, right? But altruism in the modern sense is, according to Scheler, not what genuine love is actually about. Love is something higher. Love is something better. Love is, you could say, of a higher order within the hierarchy of values that Scheler uses as his guide for understanding these ethical matters. So, not to say that love is not connected to benevolence or altruism or anything like that whatsoever, but Scheler wants to make sure that we don't confuse it for those or think that love is reducible to these very modern concepts that many people often do try to take love and place it under.